I'm the last survivor of the Holocaust in our family.
Behind the words, pictures, and artifacts in the museum are people whose stories of survival and hope come alive to inspire new generations of upstanders. One by one, these stories stir the soul.
Can there really be hope for us?
Mine is 4018. My sister was 4017.
Holocaust survivors, their descendants, liberators, champions of justice, and courageous upstanders ask only this: hear my story, so that the lessons they teach will echo for generations.
I will never meet someone else like my father. But there are many of us who, if we come together, can keep his voice alive.
These stories will change you. They will move you to action, inspiring the best of humanity every day.
I'm Corey Silbernagel, Director of Collections and Exhibitions at the Nancy and David Wolf Holocaust and Humanities Center. Today I'm joined by Sandy Kaltman. She's the daughter of 2 Holocaust survivors, and we are thrilled to learn their stories today. Sandy, thank you so much for sitting down with me. Anytime I get to spend with you is always a pleasure, I've always found, so thank you so much.
Well, I appreciate the invitation, Corey.
Yeah, so let's start by just telling us a little bit about who you are. Where are you from, and who are your parents?
I'm from right here, Cincinnati, Ohio, born here in 1955, and my parents were Roma and Sam Kaltman.
Let's talk about your mother a little bit. She was born in Lodz. What was her life like before the war, before the Holocaust?
As she told the story, her life was very happy before the Holocaust. She was the youngest of 5 children, and her mother was the youngest of 10 children, and so she grew up in a very large, extended family with dozens of aunts and uncles and more than 50 cousins, and everybody lived somewhere close by, if not in Lodz, where they did. And I think as the youngest child, she said that she was a little bit spoiled and enjoyed the attention and love of her big family around her.
Yeah. Do you recall her ever talking about how life started to change after Poland was occupied? How did life in Lodz begin to change for her family?
She didn't talk about that so much, but I know that there were more and more restrictions placed on Jews and where they could go and what they could do, and I'm sure that did have an impact on her. But the big change in her life came about after the Nazis invaded Poland on September 1st, 1939, because shortly afterwards, she and all the other Jewish people of Lodz were forced to leave their homes and relocate in the Nazi ghetto. And that was a very, very big change.
Yeah. So I understand that she had to relocate kind of across the city, right? Did they bring anything with them? How was that move?
I don't think they were able to bring much with them.
Yeah.
And they went from a big apartment. Actually, her family owned a big apartment building in Lodz where they had an apartment and many tenants. And there was a retail location on the ground floor where her family had some kind of a textile shop. And they left those kinds of accommodations and were forced to move into the ghetto, where they were all in one room on a 3rd floor walk-up without running water or bathrooms.
Yeah. Wow. I understand also that Roma was a really, in my opinion, courageous person. One of the stories we share in our museum is about Roma's time in the ghetto, and that she read books and loved to, fall into a story and sometimes even skipped work to do that. Can you share that story with me?
Yes. Well, when the Nazis invaded Poland, my mother was 13, and she was looking forward to going to high school, but that never really happened. And at that young age, she, like everyone else, had to become a slave laborer for the Nazis because otherwise you didn't get food rations. And that was the only way to survive. So she didn't have much time for other pursuits. But there was one occasion when she got her hands on a book that she really liked, and she made a choice not to go to work and to stay where she was and read, and to take the consequences that came with that.
Yeah. Yeah. I recall from her testimony, she says, paraphrasing, not word for word, but she says, you could only do that when you were young. And I think, that helps me kind of put into perspective that her ghetto experience was unique from many other people, and each ghetto experience is unique. Each Holocaust survivor's journey during this time is unique and humanizing in that way. Let's pivot a little bit and talk about your dad. So who was your dad and where was he from?
He was also from Lodz. He was born in 1921. He was the oldest of 5 children, and he came from a family that was fairly secular and very industrious. The family business was plumbing, and when my father finished his schooling, which was after around 8th grade, he went to work with his dad in their family business, and that's what he was doing at the time when the war started.
Interesting. So his family was also forced into the Lodz ghetto.
Yes.
What do you know about their ghetto experience?
They experienced the same loss of their home and a lot of limitations, like all the other Jews, on what they could do and where they could go. Because they had a trade, they had some skills that were valuable in the ghetto, and I think that was helpful to them in their survival.
Yeah, yeah. Did your parents, since they were both from the same city, did they know each other before the war started?
No, they didn't. There was
How
a
did they meet?
there was a 5-year age difference between them. So when the war started, my mother was 13, my father was 18. So at those ages, that's a pretty big difference.
Yeah.
But both families relocated into buildings that were around a common courtyard in the ghetto. And it was through love of reading, actually, that they first met, because there was some availability of books in the ghetto, and they met because in the evenings, when the weather was okay, the younger people would sort of congregate in these courtyards, and that's where they met. And I think they started talking about reading and how they both liked to read, and they started exchanging books with each other. And then they would talk about the books, and then that led to a friendship and went from there.
That's beautiful. And, looking forward in their future, I see that they both continued to hold education close to heart as a really important value that kind of carries through to today. So I love hearing that story about how it began, and that it began in reading and in books. So beautiful. We know in 1944 the Lodz ghetto is liquidated. Is that the point where Roma and her family and Sam and his family leave the ghetto?
Yes. The ghetto was liquidated, and both of their families were sent to Auschwitz.
Okay. What was the deportation like for your mom? What did she share about that experience?
She shared that it was very painful to her. There had been rumors circulating in the ghetto that it was going to be liquidated. It was one of the last ones, if not the last one, to be closed down by the Nazis. And it stayed open for as long as it did because it was an industrial center for production of goods for the Nazi war effort. And so all the thousands and thousands of prisoners who came through the Lodz ghetto were a very important workforce in the Nazi war effort. So they talked about how they might try to evade deportation if it came down to it, but in the end, that was impossible. And she and her sister Rose, they heard the Nazi troops in the street. They knew they were coming for them, and they both hid in a big wardrobe, a big piece of furniture like a closet, and they waited in there. And the Nazis found them, and they stuck their bayonets through the doors of the wardrobe, and they were caught.
Yeah.
She related that the trip to Auschwitz was horrible, that they were crammed into these railroad cars designed for cattle with hundreds of people, that it was hot, there was nothing to eat, there was nothing to drink, there were no bathrooms. And even though the actual distance from Lodz to Auschwitz was not very far, she said it took several days to get there. And
Yeah.
it was a very, very uncomfortable journey.
Yeah. Yeah.
And scary,
Yeah.
of course.
She remained with her sister, though, through that journey, right?
Yes.
What was the arrival of Auschwitz like? What happened when those train doors opened and they found themselves on the Auschwitz train platforms?
Well, the whole process was very dehumanizing. They were sent to have their head shaved, all their belongings were taken from them. They were each given one dress, no shoes. And then everyone had to go through the selection process. One by one, every prisoner was taken in front of the Nazis, who assessed whether they were capable of working and therefore permitted to continue living or not. And my mother and her sister were both young and relatively healthy. And so rather than being sent to the gas chambers, they were assigned to the work side of the camp.
Yeah, yeah. It's hard to imagine for me anyone finding hope or maintaining any sense of their identity when you enter that world. Do you think Roma did have points of hope or points of her own personal resistance to maintain the memory of who she was, who she is at that time?
I think that she really wanted to survive.
Yeah.
And because she was with her sister, she had somebody to really hold on to, and somebody who knew her. And my aunt also had that same will to survive. For so many prisoners, that wasn't enough. If you were in the wrong place at the
Sure.
wrong time, you could easily be killed. But that didn't happen to them. And the fact that they had each other, I think, was very important to their interest in survival and their
Yeah.
ability to actually get there.
Yeah, yeah. They had another friend with them for most of the time they were in the camp. Tell me about Danka. This is a story we've shared in the museum for a really long time, and it's such a powerful example of survival through Camp Sisterhood, through the very thing you're just talking about of Roma helping Rose and Rose helping Roma, and their community and sisterhood, pushing them forward day to day.
Yes.
Who
Danka
was Danka?
and my mother were the same age, and they knew each other. They were acquaintances. I wouldn't say they were close friends from Lodz. But her family arrived at Auschwitz about the same time as my mother and her family. But when Danka's family went through the selection process, she was the only one who survived. And she was so despondent about losing her family that when my mother and my aunt ran into her, she was ready to throw herself against the electric fences because she didn't see any reason to survive. And they really picked up on that despair, and they wanted to help her, and they said to her, "You're our sister now. You're going to be with us." And with their support, she also survived, the three of them together.
Yeah. How were the three of them liberated? Because they remained friends the rest of their lives.
They did.
So Roma, Rose, and Danka all survived. How did that happen?
In February of 1945, when the war was starting to come closer to a conclusion, the Allied forces were advancing across Europe, the Nazis started sending the prisoners out of the camps on what they called the death marches. And of course, they were called the death marches because so many of the prisoners were so debilitated by that point that it was hard for them to march anywhere. And if they didn't keep up, the Nazi guards would shoot them. And so it was a difficult journey to make. And when, at that point, the three of them, my mother, my aunt, and Danka, had been transferred from Auschwitz to a labor camp called Stutthof. And that's where they were sent out on the road. And there was a lot of turmoil, chaos going on around them, and they could see that. And they realized there was an opportunity that they might be able to escape. And so they found themselves walking along a road that had a big drainage ditch parallel to the road. And they made a plan. And Aunt Rose was the ringleader. And she gave this a signal, and the three of them rolled into the ditch. And all the other people on the death march kept walking. And in all this chaos, people everywhere around them, the guards didn't notice that they had left the march.
Yeah.
And they stayed in that ditch for a long time. The first thing they did was take off the coats that they had that had the yellow armbands that the Jews were forced to wear on them. They turned their coats inside out, and they crawled out of the ditch, and they just started walking and tried to blend in with all these crowds of people going in different directions. And they didn't talk to anybody, but they decided that they needed to have a story in case people asked them, "Who are you? What are you doing here?" And the story that they came up with was that they were from a Polish peasant family, and they'd gotten separated from their parents, and they were trying to find them. That was their story. And the problem was they had no idea where they were or how they could possibly get to safety. And they had some adventures and also some good luck that led them eventually to real freedom.
Wow. It's amazing to think about the risk that they took in that escape. So many people lost their lives on those death marches and beforehand. It's really remarkable that they found the courage and the strength to take that risk and to continue on afterwards. It's really remarkable.
It is. And my mother discovered after the war, she had gone to Auschwitz with two of her three brothers. One of her brothers had already been killed in the ghetto, but the other two brothers, she found out, had been sent on the death marches, and both of them died on the death march. They made it all the way to that point, but they did not survive the march.
So were Roma and Rose the only survivors of their immediate family?
Yes.
Yeah.
Their three brothers were all killed.
Yeah.
And their mother died in the ghetto in 1940. She was only 41 years old. And my mother told me that she thought her mother died of a broken heart because her family had been broken up.
Yeah.
but I imagine that malnutrition and disease also were a big part of that.
Sure. Your dad also has a really remarkable story of survival. And he also remained with some members of his immediate family too. Tell me a little bit about your dad's deportation and his arrival at Auschwitz.
As I mentioned, he was the oldest of 5 kids. And by the time they got to Auschwitz, one of his sisters was gone. But he was with his father and mother, an uncle, and his 2 brothers. And when they arrived in Auschwitz, the women were sent to the gas chamber. So it was only the men who survived. And they spent some time at Auschwitz, and then they were transferred to a subcamp of Dachau. And they were liberated by the American forces from Dachau.
Wow. And they stayed together that entire time,
The
those
men,
brothers.
the surviving men stayed together.
Yeah. So after the war, what happened? How did, we've already talked about how Sam and Roma met each other, but how were they reunited after being separated for a long time?
Well, first, I should tell you that when these rumors were going around that the Lodz ghetto was going to be liquidated, they made a pledge to each other that they would try to find each other afterwards. And my mother and Aunt Rose and Danka, they eventually made their way back to Lodz, but the 3 of them decided that they had to get out. There was nothing for them remaining in Poland, and they found a way out. My mother got a job as a chaperone with a group of Jewish orphans who were being taken by a British rabbi from Europe to England to be adopted by British families. And she was just about to leave for London when someone she knew hand-delivered a letter to her from my father. My father wound up in a displaced persons camp in Germany, and there was some information passing around about who survived, who didn't survive, and my father, a mutual friend of my mother and my father's, was in Germany, and he was going back to Lodz. And so my father wrote this letter and gave it to their friend and said, please find Roma and give her this letter. And just before she left the country, she got that letter from him. And she was so happy to know that he had survived and to know where he was. But she was committed to this plan to go to England, and so she left the country. But they had this international correspondence for several years because my father remained in Germany, and she was in England. And they wrote back and forth, and in 1947, she traveled from England to Germany to visit my father, and they decided that they wanted to make their lives together. She went back to England. I think they both were trying to save up some money, and in 1949, she went back to Germany, and they got married.
Wow. And so in between them, they continued to write letters to each other.
Yes.
They continued to make plans.
I have all those letters, Corey.
Oh, that's just amazing.
But I've never had them translated.
Yeah.
But I do have them all.
Wow.
Because my mother saved them. They were in her nightstand drawer
Yeah.
for the rest of her life.
That's so amazing. One thing I love about working with our collection is that letters like that, the objects, the things that were saved, are so reflective of what happened during that time. But also, I think that, they're incredible vehicles for storytelling. They allow us to, peel back the layers of a much bigger story and look at a very humanizing aspect of a person. Our letter collections they're so special, and they're so special not in only what they say, but why they were kept. So I think it's really beautiful that your mom kept those letters, and that now, they're here with your family. It's really, really special. When did your parents decide to immigrate to the United States? Were they making these plans ahead of getting married, or did that happen after?
I'm sure they started talking about it when they decided to get married.
Yeah.
And at that point, the family had already dispersed in many different directions. And after the war, my father's family, most of them went to Israel. Mm-hmm. And my members of my mother's family, some of them wound up in South America, some of them in different parts of the United States. Mm-hmm. And their original plan was that they were going to go to Israel. But my dad was in contact with his father and his brothers there, and what his father told him was, well, if you have another option, you ought to consider it, because life was tough in Israel at the very beginning of the establishment of the state. There wasn't a lot of work, housing wasn't good, it was hard to come by, and he kind of encouraged them to look elsewhere. And so they decided to come to the U.S. instead.
Yeah. There's a very funny part of your mom's testimony where she talks about potentially going to Iowa. And that was not the life for her. Tell me about that.
Yes. Well, Lodz was a big industrial city.
Yeah.
A lot of the refugees came from very small farming communities, but my parents were both from a big city. And when she found out that the Jewish Agency had found a sponsor for them in Iowa, being a reader, she went to the library and she was reading in an atlas about Iowa. So she was reading about hogs and corn and wheat, and that just really did not sound good to her as a city dweller. And so she told my dad, I don't know about Iowa. I'm not sure I want to go there.
Oh,
and
that's
so
funny.
They had a friend, Leo Willick, who you can also learn about in our museum here, who was a very close friend of my dad's from Lodz, and he had already settled in Cincinnati. And they were in touch with him, and he told them, think about coming to Cincinnati. There's a whole community of survivors, and it's a nice place, and there's some assistance from the Jewish community to get settled. And so I don't know exactly how they were able to do this, but they made a switch. They did not go to Iowa, and they came to Cincinnati instead.
Yeah, I'm so happy they did.
Me too.
So you grew up here in Cincinnati. They stayed. What was the new life that they built here in our community?
Well, I think Leo's advice was good, that there was a framework in place, a community for them to feel comfortable in, and that was very important for them. They moved into the heart of the Jewish community, first in Avondale and later in Gulf Manor and then in Roselawn. And most of their close friends were also survivors. Almost all of us went to the public schools, but we had religious education as well. And so many of the people that we spent time with came from similar types of family. And that kind of support was really important because we didn't have much family that had survived. And for some of our survivor friends, they didn't have any family that had survived. And so we became each other's families.
Yeah. I think, it's very interesting for me today, not being a native Cincinnatian, to move to Cincinnati, have a bit of a life, but began working here and, getting to know and understand Cincinnati's Jewish community and particularly the survivor community. It's very cool that the survivors became each other's family, and that family still exists today with the second and third generations. I'm reminded all the time in our work that Holocaust history is living history, that these are, stories that are so relevant, and that rebuilding doesn't end, in just those years after the Holocaust. It continues on. That's
To this
something-
day.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. When you were growing up, did you always know that your parents were Holocaust survivors? Did they talk often about it?
I wouldn't say they talked often about it, but it seems like I always knew. I don't remember being told specifically, but it was also obvious in that our family was pretty small, and that we had so many family members no longer with us. And our families were structured differently also, in that in this whole community of survivors and their children, hardly anybody had a grandparent because the grandparents hadn't survived.
Yeah.
And I had one grandparent who did survive the Holocaust, my father's father, but he lived in Israel, and he died when I was 7 or 8, and I never had a chance to meet him. So I never knew any of my grandparents,
Yeah.
and that was not uncommon.
Yeah. Yeah. Your parents felt very strongly that the world must know about what happened. They were strong advocates for Holocaust education. What do you think compelled them to share their stories? Why was it important for them?
Well, first of all, I would just say it was very painful for them to do that, but they did it nevertheless.
Yeah.
And I do think they were motivated by, first of all, trying to make sure that people understood what had happened. And second of all, if possible, to try to keep it from happening again to somebody else in some other situation.
Yeah. Yeah. They were both heavily involved in the creation of our organization. As you look at the work we do today, do you see our work as a reflection of those foundations that they worked with others to build?
Oh, very much so. And I'm so grateful for the work that is done here. And I also very much appreciate the fact that in recent history, you have worked to take the lessons beyond what happened to the Jews during the Holocaust, because it should be relevant to all kinds of people, not just Jewish people. And there are many, many reasons why that is the case. And I'm very pleased, and I know they would be too, to know how much progress you have made in creating a universal message, and especially one that young people can understand.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's really important to be able to find windows in for students to, not only learn about the past, but, as you said, take some of those lessons and apply them today.
Especially when there are so few actual survivors still alive. They'll be gone pretty soon.
Yeah.
And for students today, World War II seems like it was ancient history, yet incidences of genocide continue all over the world.
Yeah.
And we need to figure out what can be done about that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, you and your family are doing something still to continue supporting Holocaust education, to continue creating a community of upstanders. And that rests, I think, within our Kaltman Institute. Tell me a little bit about the evolution of this Teacher Institute. You've been involved for a really long time. Tell me about the creation of that, and why your family felt strongly in training teachers to teach about the Holocaust?
Teachers have so much influence in the lives of their students, and if you can train one teacher to teach hundreds or thousands of students, you're exponentially increasing the exposure of your message. And of course, that, as a practical matter, makes complete sense and is the most effective way, I think, to try to get these lessons out there. And especially because there are a lot of people who may not even know Jewish people. They just have not met them in their lives. And to be able to learn through the stories of real people who lived here in our community from their teachers is so valuable. And I know the feedback from the beginning was so positive about the impact that those stories, telling those stories, had on students, that it really made us feel like it was such an important focus, and so critical to the mission of what is now the Holocaust and Humanities Center, that it made a lot of sense to us to support it in any way we could. And when it first started, my mother was still alive and in relatively good health, and she did some of that speaking on her own, although she didn't really like to do it. It was distressing to her to do it, but she did. And then she got to a point where she couldn't do it anymore, and that's when I tried to take on that mantle from my parents as the next generation, and try to continue that work, and particularly through the Teacher Institute, we find that it can really have a big impact.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's a really special legacy that you now share your parents' stories. You talked a little bit about it being really hard for your parents to share their stories, that they did because it was important, but it wasn't easy. And I hope you don't mind me asking, but I'm curious if it's also hard for you to share their stories.
It's very draining. So I'd say, yes, it is hard, but I guess I feel the same way they did, that I should be doing it. I want to be doing it. So
Yeah.
I'm glad for that opportunity, and who knows, maybe at some point my son will do it too.
Yeah, yeah. Thinking a little bit more about, carrying this legacy forward and ensuring that these stories, and your family's story in particular, is not forgotten. What of your children? How does your son, how does he carry the legacy forward?
I used to wonder about that when he was younger. He's now about 30, and he, when he was 18 years old, he had the opportunity to go on the March of the Living, and that is an international journey for Jewish young people, like senior in high school age, who convene in Poland. And instead of going on a death march like my mother and Aunt Rose and Danka did, they go on a March of the Living, symbolizing the survival of the Jewish people and commemorating their experiences. And before he went on the March of the Living, I was wondering how he would deal with that, and if he would really feel it and understand the significance of that place and of our family's history. And when he came back from the trip, I should mention, it starts in Poland, but it ends in Israel. And so these young people go from learning about the trauma their ancestors went through, and then they go to Israel in time for Israeli Independence Day. And so their trip ends with celebration. But the part of the trip that is in Poland is very difficult for a lot of young people. It's just an awful lot to absorb. And when Sam came back from that trip, Sam is named after my father, who was Sam also, he didn't really talk about it very much. And he didn't seem to want to talk about it very much. But about a week after he came back, I came across some photographs that people had taken at the March of the Living. And as a part of that march, each participant was asked to make a little sign and carry it that said in whose memory or in whose honor they were making that march. And so there was a picture of Sam standing there with his little sign, and his sign said, "Third generation to walk out alive. Rest in peace, Nana."
Yeah.
So he got it.
He got it. Yeah, absolutely. Is there anything that we haven't talked about today that you want to talk about or that we missed?
If it's a topic that you'd like to have here, there were a lot of ways in which my upbringing and my brother's was different from those of my peers, and
Yeah.
it was in part because my brother and I were first generation Americans, so like children of immigrants from everywhere, we were sort of interpreters of American culture to our parents. But we also experienced growing up with parents who had endured so much loss as young people, and they did a good job being parents, but I always considered myself fortunate because I knew that there were other survivor families where the parents really could never get past that loss. And they grew up in much more difficult home conditions than my brother and I did. So I was grateful that my parents, they certainly never forgot, but they were able to put it away somewhere and really devote themselves to being good parents and active members of the community, active volunteers, and really productive Americans,
Yeah.
like so many other immigrants have become.
Yeah. I think, their example of rebuilding is really inspiring, and can be an inspiration to many today, and as we look in the past to other immigrants. I think, the immigrant story of building a life as a new American is so fraught with huge challenge, and it almost seems like how could anyone overcome some of those challenges? But your parents did, and I think that is really a huge special part of their story. And it's why I am so privileged to be able to learn about them and share them through our work here.
Well, we always appreciate your interest in that story and in telling it, and I have a feeling I may have some more artifacts for you if I start going through all the boxes that I have, which I would love to share.
Whenever
with you.
you're ready, we would love to. We'd love to talk about them. I think, truly, aside from podcast filming here, every item in our collection shares such a powerful story, and it helps us not only preserve the past, but really reveal those stories in a way that people remember. It's hard to remember the dates and all of the history of the war and of the Holocaust, but I think for many students that come through the museum, what they do remember are the people that they learned about. Artifacts, photographs, testimonial, all of those things are just ways for us to share story.
Well, and I think especially for students, the notion that you could get to a point in your life where you have nothing that belonged to you from your younger self is something that can make a big impression. And that was the case with my parents. You know, when I say artifacts, it's not like we have jewelry or photographs or really much of anything. When my
Yeah.
parents came to this country in 1950, everything that they possessed fit into 2 trunks about this big, and all of that had been purchased after the war. I mean, they didn't have anything
Yeah.
from their young lives.
Yeah. And one of those trunks, 2 of those trunks are in our collection
Right.
today.
Right?
It's amazing to think, to be on a journey. We have a lot of photographs of your parents on the ship coming to the United States that they took this journey and left behind to start anew, and everything they carried with them was in those 2 trunks. It's really remarkable to think about those suitcases, those trunks taking that journey too, along with them.
And one of them was recycled. One of the trunks that my parents came over with, my brother took to Israel with him when he went to spend a year there when he was in college.
Yeah. Yeah, it has it painted on the top of it as the address.
Yes,
that he was
where
going
he was
to.
going
Yeah.
in Israel. Hmm.
So interesting. So it has two lives, 2 stories connected to it.
One other topic I want to raise
Yeah.
is that the importance of family to my parents afterwards. Those who did survive, they really wanted to hold them close. And it didn't mean they always got along so well. I mean, my mother and her sister fought all the time, but they were so close to each other. And my parents put a lot of effort into trying to reunite with their surviving siblings after the war. And as a result of that, my parents brought my father's brother Simon from Israel with his wife Helen and their then baby Yafa. And they also brought my mother's sister Rose and her husband Izzy from England to Cincinnati. So it probably wasn't that easy to do that, but they really wanted it to happen. And they did everything they could to bring that small remaining family back into the same geographic location. And that was the family that my brother and I grew up with.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and that speaks also to this community of survivors that we had been talking about. There's so much overlapping and weaving together of different experiences. So I imagine that was really important to your parents to have had some surviving family, and then to be so much later in life bringing them all together. I have a last question for you. What hope do you have for our future of both Holocaust education, of carrying these legacies forward today? What message do you have for future generations?
If our civilization is going to continue to exist, we have to figure out a way to stop genocide and to do something about hate and the otherization of people who are not just like us. It's essential to our survival. And in a time when, to me, there seems to be a lot of focus on dividing people, I feel so strongly that what we have to be doing is figure out how to bring people together. We have a lot more in common than what distinguishes us from one another. And that's where we have to be focusing.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. I agree. There's much more in common between all of us than what is different. Yeah, that's something we should always keep close to heart. Well, thank you so much for sitting with me today and sharing a little bit about your mom and dad. I think, for as long as I've been sharing their story with others in our museum space through our programming, I learn something new every time I hear you share their story. So it really is, it's my honor to be able to talk with you.
Well, thank you so much for what you do, Corey.
Thank you. Thank you.
To make sure you don't miss an episode, subscribe to our channel on YouTube. Let us know your thoughts on this episode. Our email is in the show notes. You can also connect with us on Instagram and TikTok at Holocaust and Humanity, and X and Facebook at CincyHHC. Hear My Story is a production of the Nancy and David Wolf Holocaust and Humanity Center. The center's mission is to ensure that the lessons of the Holocaust inspire action today. This series is part of the Cynthia and Harold Gutman Family Center for Storytelling and is generously supported by Margaret and Michael Valentine. Visit us in person at Historic Union Terminal in Cincinnati, Ohio, or online at holocaustandhumanity.org. Managing producer is Ann Thompson. Consulting producer is Joyce Kamen. Technical producer is Robert Mills. Technical director is Josh Emerson. Select music is by Kik Lee. This is recorded at the Nancy and David Wolf Holocaust and Humanity Center in Cincinnati, Ohio.